Welcome to the SparkCom podcast, where we talk about trends and what's coming next. My name is Manny and I'm with
Adam Hartung, sparkpartners.com.
Thank you very much, Adam. And so this month, we have focused on innovators. We talked about Tony Hsieh. We talked to some local innovators, Micah, Kinder, and looked at the role of an innovator in a business and in business in general. But for this episode, the innovator is you. The topic is you. And really looking at what can you do as an innovator looking forward. So we're rounding out the year here, 2020, and 2021 is around the corner. And certainly we want to get in the right mindset so we're able to approach the new year with gusto and adaptability. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the roles that an innovator should have in both their mind and their hands and in operating as they enter this new year. But before that, I wanted to invite our listeners to contact us if you want your business featured on our show. And so you can reach out to me at manny@sparkpartners.com.
Or me at adam@sparkpartners.com.
And we'll be going through the list and handpicking a few to bring on our show and actually spend some time understanding your business. And as you've heard and seen in previous podcasts, there's a lot of value you can get by speaking with Spark Partners about your business. So again, invite you to contact us.
This year we covered home building, and we covered healthcare, and we covered space exploration. So as you can tell, we go pretty wide trying to talk to innovators about whether they're likely to be successful or not, and what some of the good parts are of their value proposition and what some of the weaknesses might be. So I hope that a lot of people out there would like to have us maybe take a half hour and talk with them about what kinds of insights we would have, matching up what's going on in the world, matching up trends, matching up behaviors of consumers with their thoughts about their value proposition and their value delivery system to see whether it's going to fit for them in 2021.
Absolutely. And you know, the holidays represent a time for reflection and pause and spending time with family and friends and so forth. Of course, this year is a little different with the pandemic being here, but it also offers up an opportunity for us to really recalibrate and look at the next year, look at what we're doing in the future. So Adam, let's start off with that. Let's start off with what should an innovator have in their tool chest as they approach 2021? And I have an idea that it might have something to do with trends.
Yes. Well, let's start off with, in the first quarter, we brought out that ebook about thriving COVID and post-COVID. And it's still available at sparkpartners.com. I encourage people to go download the ebook, give it a read, because we cover the 4 big themes that we said were going to be important in 2020. They have been, and are going to be important in 2021. I'd like to kick off maybe at the beginning of this. Let's talk about mobile. There was a big effort or a lot of discussion, put it that way. There's a lot of time spent with people talking in the third and fourth quarter about they thought people wanted to come back into the office. You know, we want to get back to the office. Let's get over COVID, get back to the office. This week, the head of HR for Twitter is doing television interviews on national TV like CNN, and then that's getting syndicated on some of the local channels, where she said that if they thought back a year ago, before COVID came on, that 90+% of people wanted to be in the office and fewer than 10%, single digits, wanted to work from home. All surveys of their employees today she said, has made that flip. 80 to 90% want to work from home, fewer than 10% want to work full-time in the office. In other words, people want to be mobile. And I think what we're trying to get at here when we're talking to innovators is I can say, hey, be mobile. And you go like, okay, I've got a mobile phone, and they stop. What we're realizing is that these were trends that were set in place a long time ago. The technology was already there. And what the smart companies, the smart innovators are doing is building that right into their business model today. In other words, you wouldn't want to be starting your business or planning for your business in the next 2 years as being one where people largely work from an office, because it's not going to happen. That trend has now changed. The trend now is to be mobile. That means you're going to be working from wherever you are, and that you're not thinking of work as being something that's done in a remote location or in an office. And so that's what we think we're trying to get across to innovators, to say, hey, think like these people that are running the Twitters, think of the people that are running the LinkedIn type companies. And they're saying, you know what, we're going to start to say that we're going to have people permanently working out of the office. I think Apple said they expected to be a third of their employment in 2021. And I would encourage people out there that are with small businesses, entrepreneurs, and people looking to grow. Are you planning for it to be that way? Do
Yes,
you
exactly.
intend for it to be that way? Are you recruiting for it to be that way? And do you have your metrics set up so that you can succeed with people working that way?
Yeah, I believe a lot of business leaders have a very staunch attitude towards things because that's the way they're done, right? Historically. Well, we've always worked from 9 to 5, or we've always worked in the office, or we've always done this. So I feel as though anytime you say to yourself or your team, we've always done it this way, that's an area for exploration, and especially being able to align it with one of these current trends.
You know, there's huge advantages to this idea of working mobile and working from home too. If you remember, when we went to offices, people say, "Well, that's good because we can bump into each other at the water cooler and we can have these impromptu conversations." And I've always contended, actually, that's not true. First of all, it's a decline on your productivity. How much time are you spending at the coffee pot or the water cooler or bumping into somebody else's office? How much time is wasted when you're doing that? I don't think it really helps us to be productive when we have a lot of unstructured thought. Now, it doesn't mean you shouldn't have meetings sometimes intended for brainstorming and unstructured thought, but just to sort of randomly do it accomplishes very little. I mean, the number of times some unstructured hallway conversation led to an important part of the business is extraordinarily rare. But the downside of it is that this also develops office coalitions, and the next thing Frank and Bill and Fred are running into each other. But Mary isn't in on those conversations very often because they're not comfortable with Mary for whatever reason. Perhaps where she went to school, perhaps her age, perhaps her ethnicity. And so Mary isn't included in those conversations. And that's bad. That was been bad for business forever. I think this new mobile way of working changes that. The other good thing is if Bill or Frank had a lot of time, they could watch Harvey walk down the hallway into the CEO's office, and then they'd say, "Oh, Harvey went in the hall. Let's go in check with the CEO afterwards." Nowadays, we can more manage that. CEOs can say, "Well, how much time am I spending with Harvey, and how much time am I spending with Mary, and how much time am I spending with Bill and Frank?" and make sure that they're getting a much more balanced view of their business. This mobile idea isn't an idea, and it's not a trend just because cell phones exist or just because Zoom technology exists. It's a trend because it helps people to be successful. And that's the part
Right.
that innovators have to start to really get their minds around, is that I'm going to be more successful with this technology and this way of working because I am helping my people be more productive. I'm getting a better set of inputs that balance out my business and the view of the customer. And really think of it that way. Don't think of it as just something new and different, but actually think about this is a trend because it's getting better results.
Yes, and I believe it's got to be an intentional directive from leadership to embrace mobile in every aspect of their business. And it's not simple enough to have, okay, we have an app. We check that box that we're mobile, right? It's much more than that. It's an outward facing to customers. It's an inward facing to your team. And then there's other aspects of mobile and mobility, which are undiscovered business models. We've talked about Lyft and Uber and all these sort of new ways of doing business, and that's not going to stop. There's going to be new business models coming up that align with mobility and not being tied to a physical location. Last podcast we discussed retail, and so I think once some innovators start looking at connecting the dots between these current trends and mapping that to their own business, then they can start to reach higher levels of success.
Yeah, another second big trend is asynchronous ways of working. And I was part of the movement back 20 years ago of offshoring, and it was, okay, we could get a group of engineers in China or in India or Pakistan or some country that are trained but lower cost. They could do engineering projects for us, right? And we'd bring them in. And what would happen inevitably is that the clients I would work with would say, "Oh, let's go hire some of these guys." Then they would start complaining. They'd say, "Oh, the guys, they don't really seem to understand our business. They don't really seem to understand the questions." And I would have to go back to them and I would say, you know what, what's happening here is that you're relying on all the hallway conversations. In other words, you guys go into this office every day in Dallas, you sit and you chat with each other, and then you go around and go out and you do some work individually. And what you're saying is the people that are in India or China, they're not sitting there listening to those conversations. And so therefore you think less of them. But in the asynchronous work of world, what we're saying is get clear about these notions. If you've got an improvement in your product, or you've got an improvement in the project, or some idea about where the engineering of the project should go, then you should be writing that down and you should be making it available in an asynchronous way so that everybody can share in that idea and everybody can build on that idea. It was actually sloppy work habits that people had 20 years ago that led to some of the weaknesses that were in outsourcing. It wasn't that the people in foreign countries really, struggled with the language so much or struggled, they weren't as well trained or somehow they weren't as good engineers. It was much more a matter of, no, we just really didn't do a very good job of communicating with them. But that's what asynchronicity is about. It's about me being able to work at 6 o'clock in the evening Pacific time zone when I'm feeling really productive and I've got some good ideas that came from the efforts I had that afternoon, putting them into some kind of a communication that I can share that somebody can pick up in India 4 hours later, somebody can pick up in Hong Kong 6 hours later, and that somebody can pick up on the East Coast 12 hours later, and that we can all be working on it simultaneously. And I think that's something that, again, innovators need to get their minds around. You drastically improve productivity when you do that. Now you can start to incorporate a global view of your business, but it requires a different way of working. And in the past, we thought of this asynchronous and these sort of, we'll use email, throw it out there, but we didn't get thoughtful about it. We didn't really try to say this is part of our business model. It's part of the intended plan. And that's where I think we see in 2021, the winners are going to go down that direction.
Yes, and I believe it goes beyond just the tool itself. Oftentimes, these asynchronous tools are a pulpit, right? You feel as though you step up to the pulpit, you say your thing, and then you walk away and it's done. And the answer is absolutely not. Right. It still relies upon follow-up. It still relies upon, hey, I sent you this message 2 days ago. What do you think? I mean, those, I'm not going to call them old-fashioned values, but those things are still very relevant even in an asynchronous world. So the tool's not going to do it all for you. You still have to actually lean in and like you said, build your work culture, build what you do around the asynchronous communication, and not just expect some magic app to solve it all.
I've heard a lot about people saying that they get worn out by doing so many video conferences or so many Zoom meetings. And I hear that and I say, well, you know what that's telling you? It's telling you you're having meetings you don't need to have. And in the past, you would say, well, I want to schedule an hour for a meeting to talk about product development or communications or a new launch or whatever. And then you would fill the hour because people would get in a room and they'd pour coffee and somebody would bring donuts perhaps, or, and then we'll talk about somebody's wedding or somebody's, new child, and you filled up the hour. But now that we're having to do this in this new technology, we're starting to realize that, that just gets weary, and let's just cut to the chase. And we're actually getting things done in 15 minutes that we should have gotten done in 15 minutes a long time ago. And so this is, again, sitting here saying, well, how do I make that work for my business? How can I be better at buying things? How can I be better at working with my supply chain partners or my distribution? How do I actually see through these problems, what look like problems, and actually make them benefits that I can build into my business?
Absolutely. I also see a lot of sort of a new opportunity for more results-based payment, especially of hourly workers, right? The whole hourly worker mentality has been born out of the past 80 years, 100 years since the Great Depression of, an hour's work, or hours pay for an hour's work, that kind of a thing. And so that's emboldened and sort of in a lot of people's mindsets. And incidentally, this is a nice segue to one of the next trends, which is, of course, the gig economy. Yep. And so, of course, the law and the government's going to have to catch up with all that. We had a podcast on that as well. But the way that people are compensated in the whole reward system is going to have to change to adapt to a new and emerging gig economy.
Yeah, a lot of those assumptions were based on the industrial era. It was, I need people to work on an assembly line. And so, and that meant everybody working at the same time in the same place to make something happen. We even viewed accounting as an assembly line, pushing the paper from one desk to the next desk. You can go find these photographs of people from the 1940s all the way well into the 1980s, where you see these old steel case desks side by side, people pushing paper from one person to the next. That was the old way of thinking about getting things done. Today, with technology, with what we can do with our computers in terms of processing digitally things, most work isn't done that way. Sure, there's factories, and sure, we need those factories to make certain things, but it's totally different. Factories are never going to be what they were because they're automated, they're mechanized, things happen in those factories with very few workers in them. It's handed from machine to machine with oversight by humans. And it's really become much more an issue of how do people add value? And that we can start to measure. If you do something that's valuable, we can pay you for it. It's not really your time, it's your contribution. And again, it's back to innovators. How can we compensate people for their contribution and move out of those old ways of thinking and say, if you make for me a really great ad or a brand statement or, a connection with a customer or solve a problem of some kind, that's worth a lot. And I can pay a lot for that.
Right.
I'm not just going to pay you to come and be here and sit in meetings and make small contributions all the time, hoping that that's going to continue in a prolonged fashion, but rather getting much more specific about, help me out now. And by the way, if you burn out working for me on that, that's okay. Go work for somebody else for a while and to get your batteries recharged, and we can go at it again, in 6 months or a year or 2 years.
Yeah. That old school mentality also offers up an opportunity if you go beyond it to actually expand your horizons. I'm reminded of a conversation I overheard a few years ago about a gentleman who was just super angry at the fact that all these robots are going to take his welding job, right? And old school blue collar guy, and it was very, very colorful conversation, a lot of 4-letter words, and I love the guy. But he's just saying, what am I doing here? My job's going to be gone in 5-10 years. And his attitude was to tell that technology to go someplace else, right? But in fact, the real innovator would see that as an opportunity. Okay, the world's changing, and how do I change to go to where the world's going and not be stuck in my thinking?
Yeah, how could I become an operator of a mobile welding device? Or how could I improve the technology of a welding device that's been created by a physicist who never actually had to do welding all day long and didn't understand what happens to metal as it's heated for all days during the long welding process, et cetera, et cetera. And so you start to bring in the applicable innovators' ideas to go along with the researcher or the product developer's idea who's come from a more academic background. So rather than reject it, you work with it. I mean, even I can remember as a young boy, the old song about John Henry with his hammer, and he goes up, driving railroad spikes. And at the end of the day, he's got to compete with the automated railroad spike driving machine. And the song ends with John Henry dying, has a heart attack at the end because he can't keep up with the machine. And that song was written in the 1940s. And it's just, we don't seem to want to, as innovators, often understand these changes are inevitable. Technology is moving forward. Let's take advantage of that. Let's become, and working independently allows us much more flexibility to go out and think about, how do I add things together? How do I get 1 + 1 = 3? And that's where artificial intelligence comes in. It's how do I make things smarter, right? You don't have to be an inventor. I was just, this week, watching some old television programs on the History Channel talking about inventors versus innovators. And, they talked about the fellow that was the pharmacist who invented the formula for Coca-Cola. He died before it ever became important. And his family, his son and his wife, pretty much on his deathbed, for desperation, sold the formula for $600 to the fellow that created the Coca-Cola company. The McDonald brothers figured out an idea. They said, hey, if we get rid of car hops and we have people come to a window, then we could improve the performance of our restaurant. Then they said, well, why don't we turn the restaurant into a factory? And they were selling that for $900. You could buy, the idea of a factory as a restaurant as a factory was a $900 sale from them. You could come see their factory restaurant that they had in Riverside, California. But it was Ray Kroc that came along and said, you're really still limited in your thinking, right? The innovator will move on to that next step. They'll take it out there. So I think that's another thing I want our innovators to see is that you can take these big trends, and the idea is you don't have to be an inventor. Just see how how trends are going to impact something that's happening today, and take it to that next piece, take it to that next level of productivity by adding the technology of a cell phone, by adding some artificial intelligence, by adding the use of a gig environment rather than a paid employee. By adding that to something that already exists, can you change the business model in a way that can actually be an enormous breakthrough?
Yes, and I think the biggest thing that holds people back, and this is my certain pet project or pet discussion topic, is the topic of fear. And that holds so many people back, whether it's somebody afraid to embrace the gig economy. Well, they're just going to try to rip me off, right? Or that whole attitude of why they don't want to use gig workers, or, well, I don't want to trust this computer. What is this AI business? Whatever it is, it's a fear-based decision that's holding them back. But the example I like to use is when I get that sort of mentality is I say, are you afraid of the telephone? And they say, of course not. And then I say, well, what about a year or two before the telephone became something that was ubiquitous? You think that person was fearful? Maybe. And so I use that as an example to tease out the fact that fear is holding them back. But fear can be answered by understanding and by knowing.
Yep. Yep. I mean, it's hard for people sometimes to want to take that leap because they'll say to themselves, in her infinite wisdom, the creator of the universe gave us unlimited data about the past, but not one fact about the future. And so therefore they'll say, I'm happier studying the past and seeing what's worked back there. But the truth is you can project trends. I've been doing this now for 30 years. And I'd say that the number one objection that I run into when I'm talking to folks, especially in big corporations, is they'll say, well, identifying trends is a fool's errand. And I'll say, really? Really? What about Facebook? What about Apple? What about Microsoft and in the world that Bill Gates built? You think those people just were lucky? Were all those people lucky? John Kellogg built cereal for his sanitarium in Battle Creek, Michigan. But it was his brother, Will, who said, you know what? Why are we only selling cereal to the people that come to our sanitarium? We could sell this to everybody, and it would be a great healthy breakfast food for people around the world. So here we had the inventor, John. He didn't want to do it because he thought that healthiness came from going to a sanitarium and doing an exercise program. And he had a whole approach for health and wellness. But his brother Will said, hey, wait a minute, let's offer this to everybody, right? Because there's a trend towards better eating. There's a trend toward healthiness. Let's support that trend toward healthiness by making our product available to everyone, putting it in boxes and selling it as a commercial product. And that's what I think we're trying to encourage our innovators to do. Is to say, take a look at these trends, realize that they're just as real as any historical fact. It is true that people are going to continue to be more mobile. They're going to continue to work more asynchronously. The gig economy is growing at 20 to 28% a year, and it's not going to stop. We're going to break those old traditions and hidebound ways we thought about work, and now build on that. If you can find somebody that's tied to the old way and you bring in the new way, then that's what's going to give you the breakthrough to be able to be a great innovator and be able to grow your business and make a lot more money.
Absolutely. If you look at, there was an interview that they interviewed Arthur C. Clarke, the science fiction author. I'm not sure if you're aware of this interview back in the late 60s. Actually, it was mid 60s. They interviewed him and he talked about in the future, there's going to be a time where we're going to have the ability to pull up the entire world's history on our phone. We can make communication with people across the world in the palm of our hands. And he went through all this laundry list of things that are now, right? Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of the activity that you mentioned about looking at these trends and where things are going, it's not a divination exercise. These are things that are happening now. And it takes a keen perspective, a keen eye, and a keen mindset. And we've developed this course called Think Innovation that helps to arm people to become innovative thinkers and think like innovators. And I think that whole process will open up a whole world of opportunity for those that take the course and actually apply themselves to learn more about the trends and where things are going. You can go to sparkpartners.com to find out more about the course. But certainly, any thoughts about that, Adam?
Well, historically, and it's true everywhere, academia thinks 1 inch wide, a mile deep. A PhD is not done with a longitudinal study. It's done by taking something very narrow and driving to some sort of deep new insight. Our approach and the course that we offered is based on the longitudinal studies that we started 15 years ago. Initially did 2,000 case studies. It's now over 15,000 case studies around people that applied trends and applied innovation to the business, the ones who succeeded and the ones who failed. And that longitudinal work is something you just don't find in academia. You don't find people teaching that. So when you're getting a bachelor's degree in business or an MBA, what they're teaching you is how to go look at history and do more, better, faster, cheaper, what you've always done. What our course is offering people is that ability to think longitudinally, to look outside the four walls, to get outside the box, then think. And I think that's what we really need. It's something you're not going to get by going to a university or by calling up a professor or trying to talk to somebody who says he's a guru on innovation like Tom Peters was at one time. More, it's that ability to change your mindset, to think longitudinally and start to understand how these trends can apply to your business. And our course is the first thing out there that offers that to people. It's concise, it's clear. It does take about 4 to 6 weeks to complete, but by the time you're done, you're going to have the tools you need and you're going to be ready to rock and roll.
That's awesome, Adam. Well, it's been a wonderful year, and we've plowed a lot of wonderful ground here with discussion topics that range all over the place. So I welcome everybody to go to our website and look at some archived podcasts. And with that, Adam, it's always a pleasure, and we'll be talking to you soon.
Thank you very much. And don't forget, folks, you can download the ebook, How to Thrive in the Future, by going to sparkpartners.com and send in your names and the names of your business. We'd like to interview you in 2021. Adam at sparkpartners.com or
Manny at sparkpartners.com.
Thanks a lot. See you in 2021.
Cheers.